Welcome, everybody. This is the first session of the day 2 of the event. Welcome from Paris to everybody who is here with us in Paris, and also everybody who is following this event online. And I'm going to be moderating this session. Really great to be here. Really fantastic to have the speakers here with me on stage. And without further ado, let me introduce them to you. So here with me are Jean-Paul Agon, chairman at L'Oréal. Great to have you. And Alan Fuchs, president, PSL University. Great to have you here. For this session, the name of the session is Compete in the Age of Stagnating Globalization. And there is, of course, there is so much to discuss when it comes to globalization and competing at this age. And you know how the situation, the economic situation globally in Europe, in France, has been changing so rapidly and so unexpectedly. It's so hard to preview what's coming next. But before we go into competing, when it comes to the globalization, given the unprecedented situation we are all currently living and working in, I want to start a little bit earlier. Before we go into the competing, I would like to start with the changing globalization, because when we say that the globalization is stagnating, we're going to get there, but it is clearly changing. When those changes have started, if it comes to the course of rather changes towards deglobalization, when do you think this has started? Please.
Should I start? So, good morning, everyone. I think you're right. I mean, first, there are two different notions. One is stagnation, or some people talk about deglobalization, which I don't really agree with. But the other one is changing of globalization. And I think this is the most interesting topic, because globalization is still there, but maybe changing. But it's a fact that globalization decelerated or started to stagnate. I think it was about 10 years ago. I think the numbers in world trade show that the percentage of trade compared to GDP started to decline slightly about 10 years ago, which means in 2010, something like that. And so then the question is why, I suppose. And I think there are many reasons. It's a complex issue. There are no simple answers, no simple reason or causes, but I think there are many causes. Probably, some countries, the cost of labor in some countries increased, so it meant that for some companies they had less interest to offshore their productions. There were also some tensions between countries. So I think there are many different causes that created this deceleration of globalization approximately 10 years ago.
Yeah, but when it comes, also to, of course, this is such a long process, because this is something that cannot be happening overnight, clearly. But also there is another course of change that also put globalization and multilateral order in question. It's been 3 to 5 years, put it that way. It also started with some countries and some particular political leaders pushing for less globalization and not that much of multilateralism. Why don't you agree with calling it deglobalization? Because this is very interesting. We can hear deglobalization, we can hear stagnating globalization. We also hear reglobalization. I'm going to get lost with the words. Why don't you agree with calling it deglobalization?
Well, because I simply think that the world is becoming more and more global. We like it or not, and even people or governments or countries who are against it. I remember that Kofi Annan said one day that you cannot be against globalization. It would be like against gravity. The world is becoming smaller and smaller, and the world is becoming global and global. And we see that every day. We see that with the vaccines. We saw that with the mask. We see that with the global, for example, the new tax agreement. I mean, definitely. And we're going to see that. We just saw a beautiful video about decarbonization. Definitely the only way to decarbonize the world will be a global way. So the idea that the world is becoming less global and there are less global solution or less global adventure I think it's just a nonsense. The world is becoming more and more global. And to come back to what you said first, I think it's more a changing of globalization, of what we mean with globalization rather than a deglobalization. But I don't want to monopolize the...
No, it's very interesting.
Please, Alan Fuchs. What's your take? Do you agree with if we call it deglobalization?
No. I think I mostly agree with what Jean-Paul Lagon was saying. I'm representing here, so to say, the world, the ecosystem of higher education and research, which is, of course, the university ecosystem. And I see things a little bit differently. First of all, I'd like to mention, I think everyone would agree with this, that globalization of higher education and scientific research is not a subject for debate. I mean, it's a reality, a general move. It's the general movement of exchange and circulation of researchers, students, and ideas. In the last decade or 2 decades, it has grown actually, right? So what actually happened during the COVID crisis, which is not over, of course, the health crisis. I mean, the first 2, so to say, waves, etc., which were of course terrible because borders were closed. Traveling was extremely difficult. So, of course, but it's not deglobalization. It's simply the students, if we talk about students just couldn't travel and couldn't come to us. But does this mean that once the pandemic is over, students don't want to move again and to explore the whole wide world? It's absolutely not.
I think it's like actually wanting it even more after.
Yes, absolutely. I have a figure to provide you for France. I mean, because I'm in France. At the end of October, last October 2021, France had fully absorbed the effect of the past crisis with nearly 100,000 visa issued. So we actually had a little bit more international students than we had before the beginning of the health crisis. Of course, today we now, as we all know, have a new spike of COVID, etc. But the students are here. Actually, a certain number of factors have contributed to this recovery. For instance, all the French university committed to a new academic year carried out entirely in the classroom, that is face to face, without a gauge. So that has attracted a lot of students. Now, of course, we'll have to deal with the new spike, of course, but the students are here. They're extremely resilient. They want to travel. They simply globalization is not a thing to discuss or debate for them. So my statement is that there's no such thing, and this will last actually unless, of course, we have a sort of big history accident, like a big war or something like that. I'm quite certain that this will last. Actually.
Right. That's very interesting. Now, when we establish that globalization, there is no deglobalization, and actually, with the current situation, things are moving even faster these days. If there is no threat to globalization in this sense, is it stagnating or not? Do you see this?
I think it's changing again. What you said first is
yeah, but right. that's exactly what I'm trying to understand. Where is this difference and how to identify it between changing and stagnating?
But the forms are changing. For example, I'll give you the example for L'Oréal, that I know better than any other company. For example, for us, definitely our market is more global than ever. L'Oréal is selling brands like L'Oréal, Lancôme, Yves Saint Laurent, etc. around the world, and our market is more global than ever. We sell in every country, and we have 1.5 billion.
Has this process, anyhow, sorry to interrupt you to understand better, with the COVID-19 situation and the crisis that we're living through, it's been starting third year now, going into third year. Do you see this process of you developing more businesses than ever actually slowing down or actually going faster during this time? Or there is no change?
No change. No change. I mean, no change again, because, for a company like us, the market by definition is global. It's global. It means that, and also because we want to satisfy desires and needs of consumers all over the world. And so, by definition, we are selling our products to all countries of the world and to all consumers of the world. What may be changing a little bit is our supply chain. Because during this pandemic, it's true that we realized, like many other companies, that maybe our supply chain was a bit fragile, because we had outsourced or outsourced some production of raw material or components, and that in a situation of crisis like the one that we lived for 2 or 3 years, it was maybe risky. So I think there are many companies that are reconsidering their supply chain, but it doesn't mean that they are repatriating all their production in their country. It just means that they are reassessing the risk of this supply chain, this very multipolar supply chain in situation like epidemic. So that's again, it's changing, but it's not at all deglobalizing.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Let's stay with this a little bit, with the focus that's been somehow shifted because of the COVID-19 crisis from many companies and for consumers, from rather more global to some local economies, because that also comes with the supply chains reconsideration, right? On the one hand, focusing more on local is a great thing. But on the other hand, of course, there are other downside risks to that. Let's first start with the good things about that. Let's start with good things about focusing more on the local. Alan Fuchs.
I don't think we're doing the same thing on the local side and on the global side. I mean, the ugly world was local, I think both things are true. There are things that ought to be global, and we probably won't be able to change that because it has to do with somehow the interplay between cooperation and competition. And this is a positive sum game. That's really, that's what we believe. There's a huge interest in playing the game of cooperation versus competition. And this ought to be global. On the other hand, things can be made at the local side, of course, and this is particularly true on the economic side, and I'm not totally familiar with this, but I'm not sure that we can just simply oppose global and local. I think they should be complementary.
There is an interesting example. There is this trend. I think you're right on the local versus global, but on very specific type of product. For example, food. Definitely, consumers are more and more attracted to buy food ingredients that come from close to where they live, and it makes a lot of sense. Because it's better for carbon emission, because it's to be honest, it's a bit crazy to buy tomatoes coming from Argentina or apples coming from New Zealand when you can buy from your own region. So it's good. It's a good move for carbon emissions. It's probably more economic too. It makes sense. So there is also, and there is also, because we are in a consumer good company, we know very well the trends, and it's true that there is a trend worldwide for consumers to be more attracted on some products, not on all products, on some products for origins that are close to where they live. So that's one thing, but it's not true for everything. And to give you another example, at L'Oréal, we started this idea 10 years ago. We called it at that time Universalization. And in fact, we tried to find a hybrid model between global and local, meaning that, for example, our brands are global. Brands, again, like L'Oréal, Lancôme, Yves Saint Laurent are in every country of the world. But what's interesting is that the products, the formulas of these brands in every country will be different, because they will be adapted to local population. If you buy a L'Oréal Paris skincare cream, for example, the name will be the same, the brand will be the same everywhere. And by the way, it's the #1 brand in Russia, America, China, everywhere. But the formula will be different, because the formula has been created regionally, at least. We have 7 R&I hubs around the world. And the products have been developed locally, regionally, to satisfy the specific needs of the population. So I think it's a great example of hybrid solution between a global brand, global economy, but local tailor-made solutions.
I did not know that. Now I'll start reading all those, everything in different countries. That's really fascinating. That's very interesting.
And this is very true also for some extremely globalized food, like sodas or things like that. I'm not going to cite any trademark, but I'm drinking a diet cola, and it is absolutely true that it doesn't taste the same way in the US and in Europe. So this is hybridization of even though the name, the name I was mentioning, even though the name is sort of something that is really the name of globalization. I mean, everyone's drinking it, but no, it's not. That doesn't taste the same way.
Right. That's very interesting. But these are the examples and the arguments that you've just had. These are the good things, right? Now let's go into the bad things somehow, right? Because of course, with COVID-19 crisis, economic crisis as well, there's been lots of changes to the supply chains, and we've seen also lots of the economic changes there. And this is when the risks arise about some potential way of introducing economic nationalism and being more protective about, in many cases, that's coming from politics, from politicians, that's coming from businesses, bigger and smaller businesses. Then this could be a very dangerous path if we go into protectionist mode. Instead, trying to soften the narrative, we say, no, that's not about protectionism, that's not about economic nationalism. That's rather strategic autonomy. Mm-hmm. So, but there are very, very thin lines between those, but both could theoretically go into negative effects of that.
Yeah, Yeah, but again, I think it's not the same. I think you're right. There is a very thin line between strategic autonomy and national
economic nationalism,
economic national interest. But I think there is a line, and there is a line because the reasons are not the same. At least it's the way I see it. I think, for example, that strategic autonomy means just that you have to de-risk your supply chain. And I think that this was one of the key lessons of this COVID crisis, is that companies, governments, everything understood that if you are too much completely globalized or outsourced, you have a risk in your supply chain that you can pay very, very high price if borders are shut, etc. So companies are reconsidering their supply chain to de-risk this thing. Economic, how do you say it? How did you say the other one?
Economic nationalism.
Economic nationalism, I think it's completely different. Yeah. It has nothing to do with the de-risking. It has to do with, it's very linked to political agendas. We have seen that, of course, between US and China. Even if US and China exchanges are more important than ever, we are seeing that with some countries, and it's a completely different agenda. Very political, very linked to political tensions, political objectives. And I think it has nothing to do, and honestly, I think it has nothing to do with the COVID. It was pre-existing.
It was pre-existing. No, I agree with you totally. But also what we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic, that the context of the pandemic has just increased some of the calls in that sense.
Not sure. I'm not sure. And a good example is vaccines. Vaccine is exactly the opposite of that. The vaccine of Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, etc., are as globalized as they can. They cannot provide the whole world because they don't have the quantities needed. But vaccine or mask are more another example of global. Business.
Now, certainly, there is still some work to do, I believe, here, because when it comes to vaccines, which is a fantastic example of the good thing of the globalization, of the connectors, unfortunately, we've seen some countries opposing to the vaccine waivers when it comes to also providing them to other countries. So this is what I mean when I say, these dangerous calls, they could have huge impact on everyone. Unfortunately, sometimes we hear them more now because of the context of COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, that's true. The example, the vaccine example, is extremely interesting because you are perfectly right, Jean-Paul, in saying that it all comes from a competition, scientific and innovation competition. Some firms, actually, and not countries, it's not a question of nationalism, have won the first part of the game. The game is not over because we have a lot of things there. And it was interesting to note here, particularly here in France, that some, if not many, of our politicians said, it's so bad not to have a French vaccine. What's the point? I mean, what's the point? There's no such thing. Anton Chekhov, the great dramaturgist, says something like in 1921. He said, "There's no such thing as national science, just as there's no such thing as national multiplication table." Fantastic, isn't it? What is national is no more science. That's perfectly the case for the vaccines. So globalization is here to stay. Of course, there are some drawbacks because the world is very complex. Because politically, I mean, when I said science ought to be globalized, there's one point, which is sort of a dark point, is that this circulation of students, researchers, etc., can be safely done between liberal democracies. That's one dark point in globalization. Nowadays, we just can't do globalization with everyone, if you allow me saying this very in a sort of straightforward way.
Right. And just to add something, I think, for example, again, the COP26 showed very clearly that the world is facing some very, very urgent and terrible threats, and it's very, very clear that the only solutions to these threats are global. So I think, on the contrary, I think that the past few years, in terms of pandemic, climate change, economy, tax, everything, have shown that more and more people understand, and the humanity understands, that the only way to find solution to these threats or crises will be global ones. So that's why I think that the idea of globalization is not at all stagnating. The idea is progressing. Then the implementation, or the economic implementation, may be diversely progressing, but that's something else.
Right, because it depends, of course. Somewhere it's progressing faster, but somewhere it's going in different direction. And that's a great example as well of the COP26, because when it comes to global, really, truly global issues and problems like environment, like climate change, like vaccines, COVID-19, then indeed this is more cases when we see more globalization and more united, and this move there. But again, then with the decision on this level, on the bigger level, finding the solution, absolutely. And it has proven to be very efficient as well, in the sense of how the world can, all of the players, political, business, economic players, how they can all get together and to find the global solution to the global problem. But then, of course, some of them, and COP26 results could have been a little better if somebody participated.
A bit more global.
And a bit more global, right? That's exactly it. Same with vaccines, what we've just discussed. Alan Fuchs, you said that students and academia are a great example of resilience, and they have proved that over the past years since the beginning of the pandemic. I want to bring back the issue of resilience, because, of course, this is probably one of the buzzwords nowadays after I want to say after COVID-19 crisis, but I'm afraid I have to say during COVID-19 crisis. Yeah, and this is also, when it comes to that resilience, there is a lot of all of us, and also, consumers, people, businesses as well, politicians, that can learn from that sort of resilience.
Yeah, I agree. I fully agree. What is wonderful with our young students, they're younger than we are, and every year they have the same age. That's not. By the time we're getting older and older, the enthusiasm, the ability to be optimistic and positive is something that we really learn from them, and this also means that we're due to be optimistic ourselves. Okay, that's very important. Instead of always being pessimistic, etc. So what we learn from what we can learn, I think, from the university higher education ecosystem is that definitely things will change. I didn't have enough time to get into this, something that is a little bit more detailed. I'm not saying that globalization is here to stay and it's not going to change. The way people will travel, the way they will take care of her health situation, political situation, etc. This is slowly changing, or sometimes a bit more rapidly changing, but mostly in the light of the environmental and climate crisis. What I expect in the next years, once we get rid of the virus, because in history, what we know, this is medical history, we know that at some stage we get rid. It may take longer, but we're going to get.
We hope not. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to get rid of this pandemic, but we're not going to get rid of this huge problem of the climate change. But I think in the mind of and in the mindset of all our students, they always want to go to travel. But what I see is that the kind of questions they're asking, if they are thinking, for instance, of coming to Paris for their studies, they're going to apply and they're posing some questions. And some of the questions are now more and more, what are you doing for, are your campuses sustainable? What is your carbon footprint? What do you do for the students not to travel around too much, etc.? These are basic questions which can be more and more important for students before they apply to a given university abroad. So this obviously is going to change the way globalization of higher education is going to evolve. Certainly, in a good way, we have to adapt to that, and this is a hard task. We're working a lot on this, because I don't think French universities are totally ready for this, but we're fighting hard.
No, that's fascinating. Hearing those stories, there are indeed lots to learn from the students and from the young people asking those questions for all of us, isn't it? What do you think about that?
About what? Resilience?
Resilience, yeah.
Yeah, but in the business world, it's a bit different from the university world. But I think we learned a lot during this crisis. And, again, taking the example of L'Oréal, it happened that the last year, 2020, was probably one of the best years for L'Oréal in the history in terms of outperforming the market share gains. And why? Because I think that for three reasons, which are maybe lessons for how to cope with resilience. Number one, because we were very fast to move and adapt to the situation. I think that in a world, we used to say at L'Oréal that the world is more and more VUCA. VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous.
May I just ask you quickly on this one? How come you were that fast to change? Because this is also something that many companies and businesses struggled with. Is there anything you can do to be ready to change that fast? Are there sort of, annual stress tests or something that you're that you're getting ready to, practically speaking?
You can just have this instinct that when things get complicated, you have to react very fast. And so I think it was one of the reasons of our success. Number one, we reacted very fast. We were one of the first companies in the world to stop traveling, to implement new measures, new organization, etc. Number one, fast. Number two, agility. Agility has proven to be, in a crisis like that, the number one solution, because you cannot react to a crisis like this with very centralized solutions and taking too much time to react, etc. And number three, which is a bit linked to the number two, is very decentralized. It was very interesting because, at L'Oréal, we have always been very decentralized. And in a crisis like this, it was absolutely critical to be decentralized because the pandemic situation created challenges that were different in every country and almost every day. So you could not take decisions at the head of the company for every country in every day, every week, etc. You had to decentralize, to empower your teams, to give them, of course, the frame of the strategy that you wanted to implement, but then let them do. And so for me, it has really proven that in a world that's becoming more and more VUCA, more and more volatile, complex, changing, etc., these qualities for a corporation are absolutely paramount. And of course, if you can, but that's pretty difficult, is anticipation. If you can anticipate, but nobody anticipated the pandemic, so if you can anticipate, it's even better. But it's not always possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I asked you, because this is banks are going through stress tests every year. But how do you actually stress test anything for the global pandemic, and how can you?
Yeah, but I would like to tell you something. In companies we do every year a risk analysis. And it happens that, unfortunately, we never put on the risk mapping the number one challenge that will happen the year after. So that's the way it is. It's by definition, you always try to think about the past experiences that you had, but it's very difficult to anticipate. And I don't think that there was one company in the world that prepared itself or anticipated the pandemic that we lived in 2020.
It's true. It's extremely difficult. What we're doing, for instance, this is very basic, but we try to put in place something like what's going to happen if from 1 week to the other, we need to get back to fully remote teaching, for instance. Okay, are we ready for this? That's the kind of thing we're trying to do.
But this is something that we can all, these sort of risks, we can all run through now, because we already have that experience of an unexpected.
Absolutely. We learn from that a lot. Yeah.
Well, I think this is also why probably so many changes were done so efficiently and so quick on all the levels, because we simply had no choice.
No, we had no choice.
We were put in this situation where it's not like, okay, maybe I change or maybe not. No, there was...
people have adapted very quickly. It's incredible. Our teachers, whether they're young or older, they're doing it the French way, which means that they're moaning, but they do it very efficiently, incredibly. They a sense of adaptation, which is fantastic, and we've learned from that. We learned that things like that can happen, and we've also now that this thing happened, as I said, last September, which is only 3 months ago, we thought it would certainly be possible to open this new year with fully face-to-face teaching, and we did that, and the students were happy. Now we know that hybrid teaching can be very efficient. So we're really thinking of so we've learned that remote teaching, conferences through the net, etc., was not was not the devil thing. The things that we had to do because there was no other way to do. We progressed a lot technically, which was extremely nice and extremely good. So
that goes with the digital globalization as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting. Because now I want to. So there are so many things that all of us, that the whole world had to do, had to adjust, had to change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Most of those changes will definitely stay with us because we've learned from that experience a lot, and we are more resilient now. We are ready to compete more on all the areas and all the contexts. That helped a lot with the digitalization as well, meaning actually empowering globalization. But when finally we're out of COVID-19 as well, apart from the COVID-19, apart from globalization, I do want to come back for the for my final questions to you, to the matter of environment and climate change in the context of globalization. These lessons that we have learned, the changes that we have made, how can we then implement them also to tackle that issue? Because that one, we knew for a while that it's coming. We knew for a while that these changes are happening.
Yeah. But again, I think the best for me, there is no other solution to the global climate crisis than global ones. I'm sorry, it's just a fact. It's banal, but it's just a fact. And also, I think that again, if I take the example of L'Oréal, L'Oréal has been one of the first companies to really embark in this crusade for sustainability, reduction of carbon emissions. We were able, for example, between 2005 and 2020 to reduce by 50% our carbon emission, when at the same time the production increased by 30%. So it means that we are able to decouple carbon emissions and production. And for example, we will be also carbon neutral on all our sites in 2025. We are not talking about 2050 or 60 like some countries. Of course, it's more difficult for a country than for a company, but still. And I think that, for example, on this one, globalization is also a positive one, because the fact that L'Oréal is in every country of the world. In fact, we are promoting and globalizing sustainability. In many countries, for example, we are carbon neutral in China, we are carbon neutral in the US, we are carbon neutral in many countries. And in all of these countries, we are pioneering the carbon neutrality. So in a way, globalizing good behavior in terms of sustainability is also a positive thing. So, I'm definitely...
I'm just noting down globalizing the good behavior. I
think it's an interesting idea.
No, absolutely. It's just, I have to put that down. I'm going to quote you on that one.
Please,
okay?
please.
No, totally. But this is also, the OECD, where we are now, a couple of years ago, also had a great report with a fantastic name. Like being good to the planet means doing good business as well. So be good as well. That's actually profitable and so on. But that's that's also something that now with the focus when it comes to resilience and overcoming the climate change and being more environmental for the matter of bigger globalization. On the one hand, we've seen that in many cases, focus has been switched to the COVID-19 and to dealing with these imminent problems, right? How not to postpone that focus more, how to understand, okay, we were not ready. Nobody could have been ready for COVID-19 crisis. But this one, it's been here for a while and we kind of knew about it also for a while. Alan Fuchs.
From where I speak, the higher education system, I can a sort of acceleration of commitment. Again, thanks to our young students. They something happened in the last decade, for instance, which was not that true before. Students today want to change the world.
Well, these were the students that pushed most of the changes all around the world with Fridays for Future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And they want to change the world. They're coming to our place, asking, as I said, what do you do in your own campus on carbon footprint, etc. One interesting example is that we advertise on the fact that we are providing a bicycle repair facility. And they said, oh, well, that's a very good point. So they want to change the world. And that's very important because our challenge is to provide to the world citizens of the world who are actually aware of what's going on from the scientific point of view. What we've learned from the COVID crisis is that because science was put in the center of things, medical doctors explaining things on TV and not explaining very well sometimes, and people asking science. But you're talking about things that you don't know. But why are you scientists and you don't know? This is not possible. We thought science was the truth, and we thought you're going to tell us the truth. So that's very important also for in the climate crisis, environmental problems, to teach students to be able to explain how science works, because we need more science, we need more scientific research for solving the climate crisis. We don't have all the tools right now. It's not true. Students who want to change the world, they need to be fully educated to all the different scientific levels of environmental crisis, and that includes economy. Because when they come and tell us, why don't we stop tomorrow morning using fossil fuels, we have to say something about how economy is working. So it's really I would say this is the main challenge of universities throughout the world today.
In many, many cases, these were the young people who actually suddenly held everybody accountable for what they're doing, the decision makers, the politicians, big businesses, with pushing for changes like we have never seen before. So that absolutely goes with that one. To wrap this up, when it comes to competing in the age of stagnating globalization, that's about, if I have to sum up what you have just said, that's about actually the lessons to learn here, how to compete, not to move towards more globalization, to learn the lessons of resilience that we've learned during the COVID-19 crisis and with every problem. Of course, we're not going to be ready for anything, for any problem coming to us, but hopefully we can be ready for as many of those challenges as we can. And the focus on to move towards bigger globalization, that would go into digitalization, and that would go into the environmental concerns.
Yeah, clearly. And I think that everyone should realize that, again, the world will not be less global. So globalization will take new shapes, new forms, but the world will become more and more global, and everyone has to contribute.
I agree.
Thank you so much. Jean-Paul Agon, Chairman at L'Oréal, and Alan Fuchs, President at PSL University. These are our speakers on this first session of the day 2. Thank you.